Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm John Favreau.
I'm Dan Pfeiffer.
On today's pod, we'll talk about what's at stake in the Nevada caucus with the help of the best political reporter in the state and a moderator of this week's Democratic debate, John Ralston of the Nevada Independent. But first, Dan and I are going to get through a lot of news, from the choices facing Democrats in Congress about whether to keep investigating Donald Trump to all the ways Mike Bloomberg is already shaping this primary. Two quick housekeeping notes. A new episode of Lovett or Leave It dropped on Saturday, featuring Kara Brown, Larry Wilmore, some guy named Ronan Farrow, who also joined to talk about his podcast, Catch and Kill. Check that out. Great episode. Also, a big thank you to all of you who've helped us raise $150,000 for our Leave It All on the Field fund. This is our fund to help build the ground game for the Democratic nominee. And to start, we're looking to raise $500,000 to support Organizing Corps 2020, which is recruiting, training, and paying 1,000 organizers on the ground in key battleground states ahead of the general election. To help make this happen, please donate at votesaveamerica.com/field. Finally, Dan, happy book day. It's finally here.
It is here. The book is out today, Untrumping America, a plan to make Untrumping America, a plan to make America a democracy again, is out. Thank you to everyone who pre-ordered it. I will not torture you with a long, overwrought pitch, but I hope if you have already bought it, I hope you enjoy it. If you haven't bought it, I hope you do. It's a project that I feel feels more important every day as we head into this next topic on our podcast.
That's it? That was a short, perfectly wrought pitch.
It took several months, but I finally got the right wroughtness for pitch.
It's a fantastic book. Everyone, please go buy it. It is incredibly useful in the environment that we find ourselves right now. Okay. Let's get to the news. There's a lot of it. I want to start with Trump, who hasn't learned a single lesson from being impeached, despite what Susan Collins may tell us. He's using the Attorney General and the Justice Department to protect his criminal friends and investigate his political enemies. More than 1,000 former DOJ officials, along with 9 Democratic senators, have now called on Bill Barr to resign. And a National Association of Federal Judges has just called an emergency meeting over the crisis. It keeps getting worse. Just before we started recording, he commuted the sentence of former Democratic Governor Rod Blagojevich. He pardoned Bernie Kerik. He then said to reporters on the tarmac while he was doing this, "I am the chief law enforcement officer in the country," which is not true. This is very.
Is it not true?
It is not true. No, that is the job.
It wasn't true. It wasn't true.
Yeah, it wasn't true. That was the job of the Attorney General up until now. So all of this is, very serious, very scary, completely unprecedented. So the question is what to do about it, and the question is what are the Democrats in the House doing? Well, according to the New York Times this weekend, quote, top Democrats say that oversight of the president will continue, but Speaker Nancy Pelosi made clear that the emphasis must shift. In a closed-door meeting, she described the party's message as healthcare, healthcare, healthcare. And Hakeem Jeffries, who was one of the impeachment managers, said, quote, Trump's erratic, corrupt, unconstitutional behavior speaks for itself at this point. Dan, is this the right thing to do, and is it the right political strategy for the Democrats at this point?
Before I answer, you should know that Brian Boitler just stormed through the wall like the Kool-Aid Man.
Brian has strong feelings about this, which we all had a friendly debate about in our office Slack over the weekend when the story broke. I will try. You can start answering the question, and I will try to faithfully offer Brian's position on this as well.
Yes. I think this is the exact right thing to do, and I don't want to do narrator voice me, but we have to. This is not an either or. Democrats are going to do oversight, but what they recognize, as every piece of data tells us, is that what voters care about is health care and the economy. And so it's critically important that our candidates, whether they are running for the state legislature, Congress, the governor, or the White House, talks about those things. And I think it's important that we focus on that and we don't get wrapped up with we don't lose sorry. I think it's very important that we don't lose track of that very important fact that what voters care about should drive what we say.
Yeah, I also think, let's work backwards here from the question, what do we do to stop this lawless, reckless behavior, right? What is the best, how can we stop it? What's the best outcome? let's say the House uses all the investigative power it has, subpoenas John Bolton, which now they say they don't think they're going to do, subpoenas all the other DOJ officials who left or the ones who might have complaints, impeaches Attorney General Barr, investigates more criminality and corruption, right? Like, what is the best possible outcome here? Because is there anything at this point that's going to get any Republican to change their mind and say, yeah, let's do another impeachment. Let's impeach him for good this time. Now, Brian will say, and Brian has said, that during impeachment, the fact that Trump was being impeached and there were hearings going on in the House, stopped him from committing even worse crimes. But I don't really think that at this stage, a second impeachment hearing or even a whole bunch more House hearings is going to prevent this guy from doing whatever he can to try to win this election, punish his enemies, help his friends. He's just going to keep doing this because he knows that Republicans, in a moment where he was clearly guilty of that which he was accused of, they protected him. Every single one of them, even the so-called vulnerable, moderate Republicans like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, they protected him. They will protect him at all costs. The only way to stop this is to win the election. And if the only way to stop this is to win the election, then you have to ask yourself, what is the best way to win the election? And it is exactly what you just said, Dan. The best way to win the election is to talk about issues that move voters. And these are not what Bill Barr is doing. These are not issues that move voters as much as issues like healthcare and kitchen table economic issues. That's just the way it is. And no one has presented me or any of us any data that says otherwise.
Right. I mean, you did an entire podcast series that talked to reporters. Sorry, you did an entire podcast series that talked to voters who answered this question. I just think that it's easy to get worked up over this because it's either we're going to talk about health, it's being framed as talk about health care and let Trump commit all the crimes, or try to stop Trump from committing crimes. And
right.
You can see why, when framed that way, it seems problematic to people because we generally should be, at least Democratic voters, anti-presidential crimes. But Democrats there are entire staffs of people who work for House committees who are going to keep investigating. And if they uncover things, other crimes, corruption, they will expose that to the public. It'll get out. They'll tell reporters. They will do things. They may even have hearings. But we have to recognize two things. One, you point out the most important. Republicans have announced to the world they are pro-presidential crime. So there's nothing we're going to discover, do, say, no hearing, no subpoena, no witness that is going to change that fact. That can only be changed at the ballot box. The second thing is Trump has thumbed his nose at checks and balances. And so I am sympathetic to the position of Pelosi and others, which is if we say we're going to do a bunch of oversight and then end up with no witnesses and no documents, how is that helpful in any way, shape, or form? It's, as our old friend David Axelrod always used to say, you never want to roll out the big cannon and then when you light the fuse, a little flag that says Powell comes out. That's sort of how this would be, which is we're going to subpoena Bolton. Then we're going to subpoena Bolton, and then Brett Kavanaugh and the Supreme Court are going to say Bolton can't testify. It's until we change the fundamental structural problems that begin with winning this election, we're going to end up right back in this place.
Yeah, and I want to really emphasize the point on voters as well. The people that I spoke to in the wilderness focus groups, they do not like Donald Trump. And that includes the people who voted for Donald Trump. The Trump voters, the Obama-Trump voters I spoke to in Milwaukee don't like him. They know he's a bad person. They know he's a liar. One guy in Wisconsin even called him an ass clown. But what they know all that. What they don't know still is that he's coming for their health care. What they don't know is that he's coming for their retirement. They don't know is that he's coming for their kids' education. That he's taking money from factories in Wisconsin to build his fucking wall, which we just heard about this weekend in a report. They don't know any of that stuff, and they don't like any of that stuff. And we can definitely do both. We can continue investigating, and we can have a message that's focused on healthcare and the economy. But as we all know, a good campaign message requires discipline and it requires prioritization. And you can't be talking about multiple things every day because then nothing breaks through when you do that. You have to choose what's most important to communicate, and then you have to have everyone say that. And this is what fucking Fox News and the Republicans do every single day. And, this is true about this issue and like everything else that we're going to talk about. Like, we have to prioritize and we have to have some discipline in what we talk about every day, because in this media environment, it is very hard to have any single message break through to voters. And paid media can help. The ads, the television ads can help. They certainly did in 2018. But we also need our candidate and all of the allies on the left, basically everyone who doesn't want Donald Trump to become president, to be singing from the same hymnal. And we will be saying this 5 million times between now and November, I feel like, Dan.
Because we understand that repetition is important. We will be singing from the same hymnal repeatedly until November.
Yes, that's right, Dan. All right. Let's talk about Mike Bloomberg, who's already spent a few $100 million to get a lot of attention, and he has. And he doesn't even seem to mind that a lot of it has been negative. So last week we talked about the stop and frisk stories. We have talked about his redlining comments. But now, over the weekend and the days before that, there has been quite a few more stories. He compared both. Here's just a few examples. We are definitely leaving some out because this is only an hour or so, this podcast. He compared both the ACLU and teachers unions to the NRA, said they were all extremists. He said he's never been in favor of raising the minimum wage. He talked about cutting Social Security and Medicare. He called Obamacare a disgrace. And the Washington Post did a story about how dozens of sexual harassment and discrimination lawsuits have been filed against his company, mostly in the 90s, including a woman who alleged that Bloomberg told her to, quote, kill it when he learned she was pregnant, and a complaint that he yelled the following at an employee who was having a hard time finding a nanny. Quote, it's a fucking baby. All it does is eat and shit. It doesn't know the difference between you and anyone else. All you need is some black who doesn't even speak English to rescue it from a burning building. Dan, our Democratic savior, has arrived. And as of this morning, he will be on the debate stage Wednesday night. So Bloomberg's response to these stories, or his campaign's response, he really hasn't spoken much himself over the last couple days. It's involved some apologies, some denials, some claims that he's grown and evolved on certain issues. And, if you look at all the policies he's rolled out so far, they now look like the policies of a mainstream Democrat, not a progressive Democrat, but a mainstream Democrat. Even though he was a moderate Republican mayor who was more liberal on issues like climate change, gun control, choice, immigration. But really, that was it. That was it. So how does he run for the Democratic nomination with all this baggage? And how problematic do you believe these stories are?
Well, we know how he runs for it, which is to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on television ads. It was reported today that when did Bloomberg get in the race? January?
I can't remember.
December?
What month is it? What year is it? What's happening?
Is it 2021? Is this thing over yet?
Have we been sitting here in the studio talking about this for the last 10 years, 15? I don't know.
No, it's Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
He's been in the race 3 or 4 months, and he has spent more money on television ads in that 3 or 4 months than the Obama campaign spent in all of the 2012 election.
Yeah.
It is an ungodly sum of money. And it has worked for him in the sense that he is now up. He's in second in the polls and tied for first in some of the Super Tuesday states, according to polls. The question of how problematic it will be is there are 2 parts of that question. The first is it going to stop him from being the nominee?
Right.
Maybe. Is it a problem in a general election? Probably. Right now we are living in a world of Mike Bloomberg, the brand. Right? If you have a television, almost anywhere in America, all you know is that there's this mayor who takes on Donald Trump, fights for progressive issues, and is loved by Barack Obama, which we will get to. And on Wednesday night, you will see Bloomberg, the person, with the record and the personality and the skills, and we will see whether that candidate matches up to the hundreds of millions of dollars in ads. But it is interesting. I would say one more thing about this, which is all of this information is theoretically very problematic for him, only if people know. right? We were talking to one of our good friends who's very interested and involved in politics, and that person asked me, how come no one has written a story about Bloomberg's complicated relationship with Obama? And I was like, they did. It was written in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and several other places. But nothing breaks through in that way, shape, or form. So if voters don't know about it, all they're going to know is the guy in the ads. And this is sort of a test for how much goodwill can you buy if you have unlimited resources.
So I want to talk about why these stories could be a problem for him on the electability front. But I think before that, I mean, obviously he has spent an ungodly record amount of money to get his message out and to get his brand out there in front of voters. I think it's worth asking, why is it appealing to voters so far? Why has it been appealing? Because, like you said, he's in third place in a lot of the polls, some in second place. He is doing very well with black voters. What do you think it is about Bloomberg that has been appealing to people so far?
Well, I think Democrats are desperate for someone who can win. And all the other candidates have been going through a year-long, super harsh spotlight of all of their flaws. And so every voter is very well acquainted with whatever quote-unquote electability problems Elizabeth Warren or Pete Buttigieg or Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders have. There's been none of that conversation around Bloomberg. He's just sitting out here removed from the process with no scrutiny, no conversation. He in some ways, I think he is just becoming a placeholder for people who have very real concerns about whether any of the top 5 candidates who are still in this race can win.
Yeah. And I do think he is, there's a difference between Bloomberg and Tom Steyer, and the biggest difference is the money.
$60 billion.
Right. I was going to say the number one difference is the money. But, Steyer has saturated the airwaves in the early states to not much success. And I do think, there's a couple things about Bloomberg that I think are appealing to some of these voters, and you're hearing this from people already. Number one is they like the fact that he has this much money. They think it somehow inoculates him against, whatever Donald Trump's going to do in the general election, and I think that case is suspect, but that's one of the reasons. I also think Bloomberg's tactics in this race so far, right? He's basically saying I'm a rich asshole from New York too, but I can take on Trump. I'm going to be tough. And most of his message has been anti-Trump, right? The message has been, and his slogan is, Mike will get it done. And it is a slogan about electability. And it's also a slogan about effectiveness. And we know from a lot of the research we've seen that one of the big things that moves undecided voters or swing voters against Trump is that their complaints about Trump is that he has not been effective. He has not been an effective president. And Bloomberg gets up there and say, look, you might not like everything that I've done, but I was a very effective mayor, 3-term mayor of New York City. I'm a business guy. I was successful at that. And, he is basically a placeholder for a lot of, and these, particularly college-educated voters who think to themselves, what I really hate about Trump is his personality, is a lot of his more odious policies, his more offensive bullshit, all that kind of stuff. And what we need is a bigger bully than Donald Trump, who's richer than Donald Trump, and that's how he'll win, and that's how we'll win in November. And I just think it's probably worth talking about Bloomberg's appeal, because I don't necessarily think it is rooted in a lot of substance or fact. And I think that if Democrats are going to beat Bloomberg or prevent him from becoming the nominee, I think you have to speak to his main appeal to voters, which is this sort of mirage of electability that he's got going right now.
Yeah, it's a real question of how durable. Let's just take that 19% in the Marist poll today as fact or indicative of where the race currently stands. So the question is, how durable is that? Is that real? Is that just something he paid for, and then once either he faces scrutiny or other candidates start competing in those states, that number will drop? That's a real question. Historically, we have seen not at the presidential level, but at the state level, self-funding candidates buy a bunch of really ethereal support that collapses once there's you're comparing them against another person, not just I don't know how to describe it. Just like right now, it's unimpeded. There's no one else on the air.
Yeah.
Once they have to actually come down from Earth and engage in the race and be in debates and go to town halls and do press interviews, Bloomberg is doing none of those things. He's not exposing himself to any scrutiny. So once he actually has to, adhere to the laws of political gravity, will it pull him down? And that is an open question. The argument against it is that people are so scared of losing to Trump and now so convinced of the quote-unquote fatal flaws of the current set of non-Bloomberg Democratic candidates that he may be able, he's basically bought himself a bye into the final round of the playoffs here.
From a pure tactical and strategic perspective, what do you think of how Bloomberg has been running that campaign, how he's been spending all that money?
I mean, it's brilliant. I mean, he has done it. He's done everything you would do with unlimited resources, and we've never been in a situation where a campaign has not had to make a decision.
Right.
They can do both, right? It's like sometimes you have 2 or 3 different types of ads or different strategies, and you have to pick one of those because that's what your budget says. Bloomberg just writes a bigger check. And you can experiment with all kinds of things. Very sort of infamously or controversially, he paid a bunch of meme creators to create Bloomberg memes. Now, if you're operating under a limited budget, you may say that's a high-risk strategy that is a waste of money. It could end up being a waste of money and blow up in our face. For Bloomberg, he does it. If it works, great. If it doesn't, write another check. And so I think it is very smart how they've done this. I think his campaign team is very savvy. It is a strategy only available to them.
Yep.
No one else could do this. And I imagine that if the Sanders or Buttigieg or Biden or Warren or Klobuchar campaigns also had $55 billion to spend, we would also think they were geniuses.
Yeah. No, I think the other thing that he's done, and this is sort of right out of the Trump playbook, is he has just made himself be the center of the conversation, right? Not just with the paid ads, but now in the way that the media is covering him, right? And even the controversies, even these bad stories about him have kept him in the middle of the conversation, and he has basically blocked out all of the other Democratic candidates, aside from really Bernie Sanders, from getting any kind of real coverage, right? Pete Buttigieg did really well in Iowa, came in second in New Hampshire. Haven't heard much about Pete. Haven't heard much about Elizabeth Warren. Haven't heard much about Amy Klobuchar. Even Joe Biden, right? All of these candidates that I think would be getting more coverage in any other environment. Bloomberg's spending and Bloomberg's controversy and Bloomberg just being out there all the time has sort of taken away from that.
And out there has a very specific meaning here because it's not like the Pete Buttigieg strategy for being out there is do 1,000 interviews,
right,
which is a good strategy.
Yeah.
The Bloomberg one is just buy lots of ads and do lots of things that generate attention.
Right.
The one thing I think they are doing that is clever, I think, is they want to fight with Bernie. They want this to be a Bernie Sanders, Michael Bloomberg conversation for the next 2 weeks because that makes people think that's where this is going. So I'm going to start supporting Bloomberg as opposed to Biden, Buttigieg, Klobuchar. And as you point out, it drowns out the oxygen from all of that was a terrible mixed metaphor, but you get what I'm saying.
I know. I was going to say something about blotting out the sun. I don't know what I was saying.
Blotting out the sun,
yeah.
that is an appropriate metaphor. I've been up for a very long time today on book day. And I've been talking nonstop since 6 a.m. Keeping his best chance, and it is a long shot, which we should talk about, is to get to a one-on-one competition with Bernie Sanders very quickly. And starving Buttigieg, Klobuchar, Biden, and Warren from attention is the fastest way to do that.
So what do you think of the Bloomberg ads? And there's another one out today that highlights what he seems to believe was a close working relationship he had with his good pal Barack Obama.
Did that sigh come through on the microphone? Because
Yes,
it was
it
quite
did.
audible on my end. We should stipulate that basically several candidates have run this ad. Biden has run a version of this ad. Warren has run a version of this ad. Pete Buttigieg has called himself Obama, or his campaign has called him Obama. I think it's not fair to Pete Buttigieg. But they have made very explicit comparisons between Barack Hussein Obama and Pete Buttigieg, two people who seem like peas in a pod, if you ask me. But the Bloomberg ad is, I think, the most tenuous of all of them, which is, one, it's ubiquitous. It is everywhere. I had the TV on here in New York City last night and just bombarded with Bloomberg Obama ads. Even I have a firsthand knowledge of this relationship, and I was almost convinced. I was like, oh, yeah, they were. Oh, wait a minute. That's not right. and they had a very complicated relationship. They definitely worked together on some of the issues you talked about, like climate change, gun control, other issues like that. Worked together after Hurricane Sandy hit New York. But but Bloomberg did not endorse Obama in '08. He sort of endorsed Obama in 12, but it came 5 days before the election, and it was
the most tepid. I remember at the time being annoyed by it. I have the sentence that is most annoying from this tepid endorsement in 2012. That was basically, it was right after Hurricane Sandy. It was like a week before the election, and at one point in the endorsement, he says, "This is from Bloomberg about Obama." Quote. And rather than uniting the country around a message of shared sacrifice, he engaged in partisan attacks and has embraced a divisive populist agenda focused more on redistributing income than creating it, which basically could have been a fucking Romney ad.
It basically was. And I remember thinking at the time I would rather have not had his endorsement than have that. And I would note for that when Bloomberg says Obama did not unite the country around an agenda of shared sacrifice, he is referring to cuts in Medicare and Social Security.
That's right.
That is what his argument to Obama was. I love the guy. He's pretty good on climate change, but man, he didn't want to cut Medicare and Social Security, and so I'm unhappy about it.
Yeah. So that's not really great. And look, no, I mean, you don't have to over exaggerate it here, right? Like you said, he has been, not just because now he's running for president. He's been for a long time. Bloomberg. Very good on gun control. He's been very, he did spend a lot of money helping elect Democrats in 2018 and other times. He's very, very good on climate. He's probably done more than most politicians in the country on climate all around the world.
Sure, yeah.
And on immigration as well, too. But that's fine. But you should know that on just about every other issue, he's just a moderate Republican. And not even moderate in some ways, right? And he's had all these very sort of odious comments that keep coming out throughout his career. And, look, I think the other thing that's tough here is there's a lot of folks on the left who spent a lot of this campaign telling us that Pete Buttigieg is some centrist shill and not a good enough Democrat, and Joe Biden is not a good enough Democrat, and Amy Klobuchar is not a good enough Democrat. And it's like, now we have someone in Mike Bloomberg who really isn't a good enough Democrat, who really is a moderate Republican. And because a lot of times they spent this entire campaign telling us that good mainstream Democrats like Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar and Joe Biden aren't good enough for us, it's going to be harder for a lot of people to believe that that's true about Mike Bloomberg when it is true about Mike Bloomberg.
This is the fable we will tell our children. A boy who cried centrist. Yeah,
exactly. So, a lot of these stories that we've seen over the last couple of days seem like they've been pitched by some of the other Democratic campaigns. We've heard just about all of the Democratic candidates go after Bloomberg this weekend. Why do you think they're so focused on him when Bernie's the front runner in the next two states and Bloomberg's not even on the ballot? And how do you think they should? Let's start with that question first, and then I got to follow up.
I think the reason they are most focused on Bloomberg is panic. Right. The strategy to date has been, whatever your path is, win Nevada, win South Carolina, outperform expectations there, and get into the one-on-one battle with Sanders. And now you have Bloomberg out there who's not on the ballot in either of those states, is sort of evading scrutiny and basically blocking you from that position. And so you have to do something about it. And I think that's what's driving it. And I think there's a belief with, some merit that his support is pretty soft, and a little bit of relevant information would, like the stuff you mentioned at the top of this segment, could move voters. And so they are headed in that direction. I think they're also probably pretty annoyed. They're out here
Yeah, I'd be annoyed.
Yeah, they're out here taking the Bolt bus back and forth to the headquarters, and Bloomberg is flying people on a private jet places.
Yeah. So this morning there was another poll out. It was a qualifying poll for this week's debate. Bloomberg qualified. So now he has announced he is going to the debate in Nevada on Wednesday night, even though he's not actually competing in Nevada. Now that Bloomberg is in this debate, what do you think is a good debate strategy for the other candidates? It seems to me, looking at the news over the last couple of days, that they are going to come guns blazing on Bloomberg. And, part of me thinks I understand why they're doing that for all the reasons you just said. And I do think it would be weird if they didn't hit Bloomberg. Like, of course they should take that opportunity to do so. But I could see a debate where most of the debate is focused on all of these candidates hitting Bloomberg. And basically what happens as a result of that is status quo. Bernie remains the front runner. No one has challenged Bernie. And if you're Bernie Sanders, that's great, But if you're any of the candidates not named Bloomberg who's trying to win the Democratic nomination, I don't know if it's the best strategy. But I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, once again, challenging, but you're exactly right about what the likely dynamic here is, which is everyone's going to go after Bloomberg, and Bernie Sanders is going to continue to be the person in the pole position for the Democratic nomination, regardless of what happens to Mike Bloomberg. Because if Biden, Buttigieg, Warren, Klobuchar want to stop Bernie Sanders from being the nominee, they have to stop Bernie Sanders from winning Nevada or South Carolina. And attacking Mike Bloomberg does not accomplish that goal in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. I guess I want to know what you think is sort of the most effective way to run against Bloomberg. I saw some candidates, Bernie did this, Warren did this, finally take on this notion that Bloomberg is the most electable Democrat, which I believe is the primary appeal to most voters. And, Elizabeth Warren was in some interview over the weekend where someone said, is it worth it to make this deal with the devil? Where you accept, a nominee who can spend unlimited money, to get the nomination and potentially beat Donald Trump. And Warren rejects the premise of the question. She goes, well, I don't think it's a deal with the devil because I don't think he's the most electable Democrat, and here's why. And I do think that going after his electability is the most effective way. I mean, I think you could get up there on stage and say, people think that Mike Bloomberg is going to be the best person to face Donald Trump. This could be Donald Trump's, in many ways, dream candidate. He's going to lose, Bloomberg will lose the Democratic advantage against Trump on the issues that voters care about the most, like health care and retirement, because he's called for Social Security cuts and Medicare cuts and not raising the minimum wage and all these things that we know actually move voters. And that Trump is going to absolutely hit him as an out-of-touch global elitist who literally runs the fake news. I mean, it is right in Trump's message wheelhouse to take on Bloomberg like this. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think that strategy is right, which is you have to take on the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room at this time may be the electability of a moderate Republican, but I think that has been true always throughout this campaign, is that we've danced around the electability question in so many ways. And when candidates have actually taken it on, either arguing for themselves or arguing against another candidate, they've actually had success in moving numbers.
Yes.
Because it's what people care about, right? Elizabeth Warren was on a rocket ship to the nomination until Buttigieg and Biden made a case against her electability. I don't think that case was accurate, and I think she suffered from it through a lot of misogyny in the media and in the electorate, but they took it on, right? And no one has made that case against Sanders, and if you don't make it against Bloomberg, he is going to continue to skate by here. So I think that's exactly right. And I think, it's just if you were to take a step back and get yourself out of the Twitter cable news bubble that we currently live in, and you were to say to yourself, okay, this is an election that's going to be decided primarily in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have to persuade Democratic base voters, mostly African Americans, to turn out at a higher level than in 2016. We're going to have to persuade some white, non-college educated voters. Who is the best person to do it? Is it the Wall Street adjacent billionaire mayor of New York, most famous for taking on Big Soda? Is that the best person to do it? On paper, that doesn't make a ton of sense. I think Bloomberg's electability case is very limited, and has not been scrutinized. And maybe he is the most electable. We don't know, but I think you can make a counter argument to it, and I'll be curious to see if people do that. And as you pointed out, that may be very much to Bernie Sanders' advantage.
Look, I think the electability case, to be fair, the electability case for Bloomberg is, I think that, back to the wilderness, those Romney Clinton voters I spoke to in Arizona outside of Phoenix, they're the former Republicans. These are the kind of people who won us the House in 2018. They are not definitely Democrats. They are still swing voters. And they are, primarily in the suburbs. They're college-educated voters. Some of them are former Republicans. Some of them are independents. Some of them are just Democrats who go back and forth. And, Bloomberg probably has a better chance of capturing these voters than some of the other candidates. And, I think Bernie is going to struggle with these voters. But the question for all these candidates when you're talking about electability is you might gain those voters, but what do you lose? And I do think if you've seen sort of Bernie's appeal among younger voters, and not just an appeal, I mean, he's crushing among younger voters, there's a real risk that a lot of young people don't turn out for Mike Bloomberg. There's a real risk that a lot of people go third party, right? They vote for the Green Party candidate if Mike Bloomberg's the nominee. And so I don't think, when we think about electability, we can't, even though I've been talking about this a lot, we can't just think about, the college-educated suburbanites. You have to think about a bigger coalition than that. And I do think that is a big concern I have about Bloomberg's electability case.
Yeah, it's math, right? You have to get there are three legs to the electability stool, right? And they have to add up to the win number in enough states gets to 270, and that win number is somewhere between 48 and 50.1, depending on third-party candidates. And it has to be one leg is increased turnout among Democratic base voters, young people, voters from communities of color, as you said, Romney Clinton voters, and quote-unquote Obama Trump voters. And you got to get every candidate is going to have that we talk about is going to have more of one and less of another one in that group, but you've got to have enough to get to where you need to be. And there are questions about everyone we've talked about, but there are also questions about whether Bloomberg is good. He may get the Romney Clinton voters, but he may suffer with the other two groups and not get you to a number that you win by.
Right. All right. Let's talk about Nevada, where early voting is already underway ahead of Wednesday's debate and Saturday's caucus. There haven't been too many polls, but the 538 average shows Bernie in the lead at around 26%, Biden at 15%, Warren and Pete at 11%, Steyer at 10%, Klobuchar at 8%. 36 pledged delegates are at stake. Dan, what makes the Nevada caucus different than Iowa?
Well, the Nevada caucus is different than Iowa in several respects. One, they're not using an app.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get to whether that's a good idea or not.
Right.
But
they're using an iPad, I guess, or many iPads.
They're using something that looks and smells like an app on an iPad, but is not an app.
Right. They're calling it a tool.
Yes, a tool.
Suite of tools.
I think the biggest difference is that there is a culture of caucusing in Iowa that dates back decades, and this is the third Democratic Iowa presidential, this is the third Nevada Democratic presidential caucus, and it is. We know very little about it. We have very little way of knowing how it's going to go, and they have early vote. And early vote is very interesting because I think it does expand the type of voters who can come. And certainly Las Vegas, which is the biggest pocket of voters and Democratic voters in Nevada, is a place where shift work makes it very hard for people to show up at a caucus site for hours on end. And so this early voting process, I think, diversifies the group of people who may be able to participate in this very time-intensive process.
Yeah, so we have the early voting that's going to be very different. And the electorate is different here as well. Obviously, Iowa was 90% white. In Nevada, 30% of the population is Latino, 10% Black, 19% are immigrants. It's very union-heavy. And so it is a much more diverse population in almost every way. There's also, the viability threshold is different in each precinct depending on the number of delegates, which is interesting too. So it's 15% in some places, it is as high as 25%, I believe, when there's fewer delegates at stake, which is interesting. So it seems like Bernie may be a favorite here, or at the very least, Politico reports that at least 3 rival campaigns say that the best they can now hope for is second or third because they believe that Bernie's going to win. And, of course, the polling shows him in the lead. What would a win in Nevada mean for the Sanders campaign?
I think it would mean that he is headed towards being the nominee. Not guaranteed that he would be the nominee, but he's in a very strong position now. He would strengthen that position even further and put him in a real spot to win South Carolina, which I think would be rocket fuel heading into Super Tuesday, where he has a lot of structural advantages given the states that are included on that day. And, when you say the campaigns think he's going to win, in one way of looking at that is this is just
expectation
This
setting.
is just expectation setting. But what I do think is important knowing that in a state with early vote, the candidates have data on who is early voting. And so they know whether people have early voted are ones, twos, or threes, or fours, or fives on their list. That's a sliding scale of support level. And so I would imagine many of them are looking at this and seeing a large number of Sanders supporters, and Sanders is building up a lead, according to their data, going into caucuses that may be insurmountable for the other campaigns.
So if you're on the Biden campaign, if you're on the Warren campaign, the Buttigieg campaign, Klobuchar campaign, like what do you need to do now? What if you're sitting in those headquarters? Like, what is the strategy here between you see Bloomberg on the horizon in Super Tuesday, Bernie sort of steaming ahead in Nevada? You're thinking about this debate on Wednesday. You're thinking about what to do in Nevada and South Carolina. Like, what's the strategy here to sort of stop this before, as you say, Bernie heads into Super Tuesday with momentum and then potentially, or at this point very likely, amasses a pledged delegate lead on Super Tuesday that will be almost impossible for another candidate to overcome?
I think you have to do something on Wednesday night to stop Sanders' momentum.
Yeah.
And I think that involves taking on the electability question. And I've seen many debates on this about, where yourself and others have raised on Twitter the question of why are these candidates going after Bloomberg or someone else as opposed to Sanders? And I hear people respond saying, does that really make any sense? Sanders supporters are 100% committed to him. Does Biden actually have a chance of getting them, or Klobuchar, or whoever else, or Warren? And the answer is, of course they do. I think Sanders has the largest number of committed supporters who are locked into him no matter what else happens. But if we remember, in the last 2 months or so, Sanders has gone from 13, 14, 15% in the polls to 25 to 30%. So where did those people come from? They're certainly not diehard Sanders people. They either came from Biden, Warren, or the undecided column.
Yep.
And so they are available to people. So you can, so I think just people think that Sanders is at 25, and the only way I can beat Sanders is to get to 26 or higher. And I don't think that's true. I think Sanders may be locked in at 15, 16. He's not going to go below that. But some of those people who support Sanders now used to support you, and you have to believe you can get them back if you can make a compelling case about why you're the person best suited to beat Trump.
And I do think this is, this debate and then the debate before South Carolina, this is like final chance here for some of these candidates to really shake up the race. And I would, look hard at my debate playbook and hopefully change it up from the last couple debates for some of these folks. I would say Joe Biden probably needs, the next 2 debates probably needs to be the debates of his life. And I think, we've talked before about how Pete probably needs to shake it up. Klobuchar is always excellent at these debates, and so is Warren. But at this point, being super on message and being message disciplined, is probably not enough to really shake things up. And I think there's a way to be explicit about why you are the better choice for president compared to the other candidates without being nasty towards the other candidates. There's a way to contrast yourself and to challenge other candidates without just resorting to all kinds of really poorly without resorting to all kinds of negative attacks. And I don't know that anyone has really been sort of explicit enough. We talked about this after New Hampshire. I was surprised that in Warren's post-New Hampshire speech, she was more explicit about why her and not Bernie than I had heard her in quite some time. And I think, you've seen over the weekend, both Biden and Pete have sort of been needling Sanders too. They've been sort of, going around this. So look, if I were these candidates, I would definitely, probably take on Bloomberg like they're planning to do, but I would try to probably position myself between a Bloomberg and a Bernie, if that's possible. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's right. If the strategy, you're not going to beat Sanders if your strategy is to go into the debate and take on Bloomberg.
Right. Yeah.
Bernie is going to continue the trajectory he's on, and that's it right now. And I know sometimes we say these things and people get mad or think we're picking a candidate over another, but this is how the math is working. This is how the contests lay themselves out, which is right now Bernie Sanders is winning and everyone else is losing. Mm-hmm. And so you have to do something to change. If you want to win, then you have to do something to change that dynamic. Yeah. And you basically have the Nevada caucus, 2 debates, the South Carolina primary, and that is it. Yeah. Unless you have $1 billion to spend on TV like Bloomberg does.
So one challenge that Bernie has had to deal with in Nevada is the fight that's erupted between his campaign and the very powerful Culinary Workers Union over Medicare for All, which the union does not support. because they say it would replace the health care plans that they negotiated for with their employers. The 60,000-plus member union has declined to endorse any candidate, but they have distributed flyers that say Bernie would, quote, end culinary health care. Naturally, some Bernie supporters have responded by harassing and threatening two of the women who lead the union, among others. According to the Nevada Independent, quote, the union and its leadership have been referred to as bitches, whore, fucking scab, and evil entitled assholes. One email said, quote, this is your chance to fix your mistake before the millions and millions of Bernie Sanders supporters will find you and end your ability to earn a living. We will find you corrupt motherfuckers. Of that you can be sure, and we will make sure you wallow in poverty and suffering. Lovely, lovely. Altogether, the union says it's received dozens of phone calls, more than 300 emails, and thousands of tweets. So, Dan, just about every other Democratic campaign has criticized this garbage over the last week. I've seen it from Warren, from Pete, especially from Biden and Bloomberg. Bloomberg cut a little digital ad with some angry tweets from Bernie supporters. That's a whole separate thing. Bernie responded to the culinary union incident with a statement that said, harassment of all forms is unacceptable to me, and we urge supporters of all campaigns not to engage in bullying or ugly personal attacks. He also said, quote, anybody making personal attacks against anybody else in my name is not part of our movement. We don't want them. Question, is that enough? Is this a political problem for Bernie, and should it be?
Well, it is a political problem in the sense that it has caused it real issues with the most powerful labor union in one of the four most important early state contests. So yes, that is a political problem. I feel like this is such a complicated and fraught topic because it is a conversation about what happens on Twitter that is much more complex and nuanced than Twitter would allow, not being the place for complexity and nuance, where it is like, let's put aside the politics for 1 sec. Do the people who are being referred to here, are they indicative of Bernie Sanders supporters? No.
Right, no.
Are Bernie Sanders supporters responsible for all of the online harassment of Democratic candidates? No. Does it seem like more of the harassment of Democratic candidates and other people on Twitter is by supporters of Bernie Sanders than other people? Yes. Did Bernie Sanders say the right thing there? Yes, I think he did.
Yeah.
Could he say more? Yes. And I do sort of want to separate two things that I think get lost in this conversation, which is you have the anonymous people who are sending these, who are attacking people on Twitter, who are sending these death threats to the culinary union and saying these horrible things. Like, that is one group of people. I do think that Bernie Sanders has limited control over what those people do.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I think he is not he has responsibility to set a tone and say the right thing. I think he has done a lot of that. I think he could do more, but he is not responsible for all of those people. Then there is a group of people who are sort of prominent blue check mark supporters of Sanders, who are very aggressive with a lot of people on Twitter, who have spread some, I think, false information in some cases, who have trafficked in conspiracy theories, but have not reached the level of certainly not gone anywhere near the sorts of things that have been directed at lots of people, and particularly people of color and women are the targets of this. Those people are a different group. Those people are probably more responsive if the Sanders campaign were to ask them to stop. Right, like we have I don't even dig into the Liz Smith sock puppet controversy.
I was just going to say, you try to explain that to someone in real life, and you sound like a fucking crazy person. So go look it up, everyone, if you want to see what was going on this weekend.
we really had a banner President's Day weekend between the sock puppet and all the other dumb stuff we did.
Yeah.
And I do think the Sanders campaign could ask those people to do better, right? Because they're hurting the Sanders campaign, because you have Bernie out here as much as anyone, and maybe more than any other candidates, calling for unity, right? And saying that he will support the Democratic nominee no matter what. And people who are very close to the campaign going out there and calling people who don't support Medicare for all murderers, or attacking Elizabeth Warren in ways that Bernie Sanders certainly, I do not believe, would find acceptable. People who are spreading conspiracy theories. Like, could he have more influence on those people? I think maybe. Because those people are doing a disservice to their campaign. Last point here. because I'm sure I was canceled 9 points ago. Is this a real political problem? I think it is a problem. I don't think it is a giant political problem. And I do feel sometimes when I hear these other campaigns talk about it, and I think in many cases they're answering questions from reporters, so in fairness to them. And they're defending their supporters and their staff from some of these attacks. But this is a process argument. And if they go on the debate stage and make this a centerpiece of their argument against Bernie, I think it is they will be playing small ball at a time when they should be trying to raise the stakes of the election.
Yeah, so, I agree with that. I mean, look, I saw a lot of people on Twitter asking us why we haven't talked about this kind of harassment on the pod before. And honestly, it's not because I don't find it disgraceful, because I do. It's because most of the assholes who do it are very sad, small people who are, just desperate for attention and relevance. And as you said, they don't represent the bulk of Bernie supporters who we've all met. I mean, we've said this before. We went to event in Iowa. We've talked to some other places. We know some of the people on the Bernie campaign, and they're just not like that in any way at all. But, it's out there and it's fucking toxic. And it's not just bots. It's not just accounts with a few dozen people. It's, like you said, it's Twitter personalities and media personalities on the left. And you're right, they have not gone as far as some of the people who've threatened the Culinary Workers Union at all, but they are still incredibly aggressive. And, they're spreading all kinds of theories that aren't true. And a lot of us have been on the receiving end of it, us included. And I think here's why it's a problem. And I don't think it's a short-term political problem, but I think it's a long-term political problem. It's not our vote that they have to worry about. Like, if Bernie is the nominee, like, the fucking left-wing crazies in our Twitter feeds can just, continue attacking us all they want. Bernie's still got my vote, and I'm still going to do everything I possibly can to make sure he's elected if he's the nominee. So you don't have to worry about us. You can keep attacking us all you want. But let's not kid ourselves how difficult it is going to be to run a democratic socialist against Donald Trump. It is not going to be easy. And let's not kid ourselves about how difficult it's going to be to convince moderate, suburban swing voters who won the Democrats the House in 2018 and who we absolutely need in 2020 that Bernie is not some scary socialist, but that he is a very acceptable mainstream nominee. And that job of persuading those voters is harder when you have when you have this minority group of supporters out there spewing this garbage. And when I see some people on his campaign, respond to this and respond to complaints about this by either dismissing the complaints or acting all aggrieved. And you know exactly who I'm talking about. That's not really helpful. I interviewed a couple weeks ago, I don't know when it was, last week maybe, Faz Shakir, who's Bernie's campaign.
Like 10 days ago.
Yeah, right. Faz Shakir, who's Bernie's campaign manager. And I respect the hell out of Faz, and he is such a great campaign manager, and he totally gets this. And he tweeted after the culinary episode, quote, "To those already in our movement, stay focused, don't get distracted. We're so close. We've got a job to do to fight for the working class and win. To those not already in our movement, come on in. The water's warm. We welcome you." To me, that is the exact right message. That is the message that the candidate is spreading and it's in Bernie's stump speech. So Bernie's on that page. And the people in the Sanders campaign who are not on that message need to grow the fuck up and act like people who could be the country's only hope of beating Donald Trump. You very likely could be leading this party very soon. And you need to understand that this is a very large coalition, that you need a very large coalition to beat Donald Trump. And you can't have that coalition by scaring a bunch of people off by acting like a lot of these people are acting. That's why I think it's a long-term political problem. You're right. He's probably going to do really well in Nevada, even with this culinary workers fight. I don't know that it has much of a short-term effect. But I do think as we're trying to win in November and everything has to go right to win, that these people should spend their time promoting Bernie Sanders' message, trying to persuade people that it's the right message, that he's the right candidate, and not spend their time either fucking, diving deep into dumb conspiracy theories or just attacking, the Democratic establishment. The road to 270 is not mean tweets about Neera Tanden.
That is brilliant, and unfortunately, like 2 words too long to be the episode title.
It also would really alarm a lot of people. So I don't think,
Yeah,
but it's just
Mira most specifically. Yeah,
it's true. It's just like it's like I said. It's a question of effectiveness. Not even necessarily like whether this is morally right and wrong, which we can talk about till the cows come home. But like we only have so much time between now and November, and it is an enormous task, and everyone has to keep fucking focused. And that's exactly what Faz said, Bernie's campaign manager. That is exactly what Bernie says himself. And all of these people on the left who have large Twitter followings, look, I know you don't like us. I know you're going to keep fucking tweeting at us. Fine, do whatever the fuck you want. But if you want your candidate to win, you got to shape up.
I think that one relevant example of this, because I can already see the tweets in response to this from some folks, which is
great.
Favreau just said that our mean tweets are going to keep.
Yeah. Oh, right. They all. Oh, it's the rude tweets. Yeah, it's not rude fucking tweets. It's threatening culinary workers.
But it's not just how do we appeal to independents and moderate Republicans, right? I think the most interesting and alarming example of where this is going is the fact that our friend, who we are 100% biased for, who we work with, we support, Stacey Abrams, is currently being attacked nonstop by people on Twitter because her group, Fair Fight, which is, protecting voting rights, took $5 million from Michael Bloomberg, which, she very nicely tweeted about my book today, and I was very grateful for that. The replies to that are so fucking dark and depressing because you have these people, many of them white, yelling at Stacey Abrams saying that she is a supporter of stop and frisk. If you just took a step back and thought about that for a second, because she took Michael Bloomberg's money to protect voting rights.
Right, yeah. What do you think? You think Stacey Abrams took the $5 million and pocketed it? You think she's using it to win electoral office? No, she's using it to protect voting rights from voter suppression.
Help Bernie Sanders,
right?
If he is the nominee,
right? It's unbelievable. Ugh, I don't know, man. I don't know. But look, like I said, I am saying this as someone who as we have made it pretty clear on this podcast, it is very likely at this stage, unless something changes dramatically, which, it's politics, and it's politics in the Trump era, so it certainly can. Unless something changes dramatically, Bernie Sanders is not just the odds-on frontrunner. He's on his way to becoming the Democratic nominee, and that means that we all need him to succeed. And I will want him to succeed as the Democratic nominee. Abso-fucking-lutely. And I think that he has plenty of strengths, and I am not as nervous as some folks in the Democratic establishment about him, though I, certainly have some concerns. But it is in all of our interest to have him succeed and to all be united in doing this. And that includes his own supporters, and that includes everyone on his campaign. And like I said, I think there's some people on his campaign that we all know who have figured that out and get that, and there's others who have not. So hopefully we can. Hopefully there's plenty of time to fix this between now and November, right?
I mean, can I end this on? Are we ending here?
Yeah, we're ending, and then.
Or you're heading into your interview.
Then I'll head into my interview.
And this segment on a hopeful note.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is, I've been wandering around New York, getting up very early, stopping to get coffee, and very early this morning, someone stopped me, and they were a very nice listener of Pod Save America, and they asked me if all of us, the four of us, were doing okay, because we had seemed sort of dark recently. And I kind of thought about it, and I said, I do feel like maybe this has been a brutal part of the process. I think Iowa, how everything played out there was kind of depressing, considering how sort of inspired we were by everything we saw up until the moment they started failing to count the votes.
Right.
And you do see this in polls, right, where people are starting, people now overwhelmingly think Trump is going to win, especially Democrats.
Yeah.
People are getting frustrated because the candidate they love may not be winning, or the candidate they love the least may be winning. And it can, these next few weeks are going to be tough for a lot of people, right? Maybe you don't like Michael Bloomberg, maybe you don't like Bernie, maybe you love Bernie, maybe you love Joe Biden, or Pete Buttigieg, or Elizabeth Warren, or Amy Klobuchar, whoever else. But I do think, for as dark and painful as it's been, particularly as Trump is on a presidential crime spree, this is, I'm not saying we're going to win this election, but we can win it.
Yes, we can win.
It's absolutely winnable. It is so winnable. It's right there for the taking, and we know exactly how to do it, regardless of who the nominee is. We have the roadmap from 2018, and every person listening or speaking into these microphones has agency in what's going to happen, right? If you're, we've talked about this before, but if you're if you're filled with angst or anger, we can like just go do things, right? Like sign up with Swing Left or Indivisible or go to Vote Save America and figure out what you can do. It's like we do need to remember that if we unify and we do the hard work of activism, we will beat Trump. He has a lot of advantages, but we can overcome them. And so it is worth remembering that like this is we can win, and we have to win, but we know how to do it, and we just got to get through this always very dark, depressing period where the candidates we love may not be doing as well as we want them to be.
Yeah, I could not agree with that more. And look, this was always going to be hard. This was always going to be pretty brutal. And I think part of this Bloomberg temptation that's out there is a lot of Democrats looking for an easy way out of this. Like maybe this guy's our savior. Maybe someone else is our savior. We're always looking for someone to save us. No one's coming to save us. It's us. It is entirely up to us what happens in this election. When we are going to select a nominee that a bunch of people do not like and was not their first choice, and perhaps when we select this nominee, that person will even fall behind Trump or be too close to Trump in the states we need, and then it'll be up to us to go to those states and to persuade the people who are on the fence or persuade the people who are not with us to be with us. And that's going to happen on the ground with all of us, and it's not necessarily just going to be the job of the nominee, and no one is magic. And no matter how much money anyone has or what kind of credentials they have, it's not going to be easy to beat Donald Trump. And that's why all of us need to be in it together. And, it was really smart that you said this a couple weeks ago, that like a weak nominee with a party united behind that nominee is stronger than a strong nominee with a divided party. And so the most important thing, whoever wins, is that we come together and work our asses off for that person. So.
And all of these people would be 1 gazillion times better than Trump. Easily.
It's just true. Just look at, and you don't have to look at what they're promising. Just look at their records, Okay. When we come back, I will be talking to the editor of the Nevada Independent, John Ralston.